Hello guys, welcome back to LR Anime. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is Explanation of Battle Through the Heavens episode number 205 based on novel. So let's start. A terrifying energy fluctuation crazily spread to the sky. Even the spatial barrier that covered this area had been shaken to the point where an intense ripple appeared. A faint crack line began to vaguely spread. Boom. The storm wildly shook at the point where the two attacks collided. The enormous ring of fire was pushed back as it became more faint, but it still rotated with great speed. In the end, it completely disappeared. A large bone blade flew backwards from the storm the moment the ring of fire had disappeared. It finally landed on a mountain. A frightening force instantly shattered the mountain into complete ruins. The bone blade weakly lay on the shattered stone. It was clear that both parties were unable to obtain much from this head-on collision. Both suffered some injuries. This bone blade is indeed a little mysterious. The large fire array above Xiao Yang's head slowly disappeared. It returned to 5 clusters of flames that were swallowed by him. His eyes were a little startled as he looked at the dense, white bone blade. He was able to sense a quiet and strange fluctuation being emitted from the bone blade upon contact. This kind of ripple was extremely harmful to one's soul. If his heavenly flame wasn't guarding his soul, he would have ended up suffering. You are indeed worthy of being someone who has caused my Hall of Souls to repeatedly fail to capture you. You do possess some ability. The first Tianzuan's eyes vaguely gained an additional solemnness as he looked at Xiao Yang. You have advanced from a 1-star Do Sheng to a 2-star Do Sheng within a short year. Even I have to praise you for that. If you are willing to join my Hall of Souls, your position will definitely not be inferior to me. Xiao Yang revealed a strange smile upon hearing these words. The relationship between him and the Hall of Souls had reached a point where neither would rest until the other perished, yet this old fellow actually trying to recruit him? Xiao Yang's strange expression was caught by the first Tianzuan's eyes. This caused the first Tianzuan to feel a little furious in his heart. He coldly laughed, "You arrogant fellow. In the future, you will understand just how powerful the Han clan is across this continent. Someone like you is merely an ant-like existence. It is only too easy for my Han clan to kill you. Is that so?" Xiao Yang was non-committal. The corner of his mouth was lifted into a faint arc as he said, "Before this, however, I will first finish you off. With just you." A strange night owl-like laughter was emitted from his mouth. His hand grabbed the mess below and an enormous bone blade flew up. It was stopped in front of the first Tianzuan. His body moved before standing on the bone blade. Numerous ripples surfaced on the bone blade. The first Tianzuan's body slowly merged into the bone blade. Man and blade merger. Xiao Yang involuntarily lifted his brow upon seeing this merger. Xiao Yang, I have bitterly trained for a couple of 100 years in order to merge my body with the Bone Emperor blade. This is the first time I will use it against an opponent. You will be used as a sacrifice for the blade. The enormous Bone Emperor blade floated in the air. The first Tianzuan's face appeared on its dense, white body. Countless tiny blood scars slowly spread over the blade, appearing as though they were densely packed blood vessels. The first Tianzuan's voice had just sounded when the Bone Emperor blade shook. Its existence quickly vanished. What great speed! Shock rose within Xiao Yang's heart the moment the bone blade disappeared. His body pulled back in reflex. The space in front of Xiao Yang fluctuated the moment he did so. A sharp blade suddenly slashed down. The blade was half a foot from Xiao Yang's head. Your reaction is indeed quite quick. A strange laughter was emitted from the Bone Emperor blade after the slash missed. The blade shook and an unusual cry was suddenly emitted. Countless blade shadows appeared in a flash. They wrapped around Xiao Yang in the next moment before the sharp blade glows aimed at the lethal spots around Xiao Yang. 6-joint body flowing ruler. Xiao Yang's expression became solemn as the sharp attacks from the Bone Emperor blade pressed down on him. He clenched his hand and the heavy Xian ruler appeared in it. The ruler shook as many ruler shadows formed a defensive net that wrapped around his body. Numerous sharp blade shadows poured onto the ruler figures like a storm, causing waves of sparks to erupt. The surrounding space would split and form a dark black crack each time the ruler shadows and the blade shadows clashed. The Bone Emperor blade's attacks began to soar as it faced Xiao Yang's tortoise shell-like defense. This extremely frightening attacking speed caused a grave expression to flash across Xiao Yang's eyes. Just this attack alone would enable the first Tianzuan to fight against advanced 2-star Do Sheng experts. Even Yarrow Ming would have difficulty defeating him. The so-called blade and man merger was indeed quite mysterious. Bang! Xiao Yang focused his mind as he built his defense. A sense of danger suddenly rose within his heart at a certain instant as his head was suddenly turned. Boom! A glaring blade light forcefully tore through the ruler shadows around Xiao Yang the moment his head turned. A sharp cold ray of light slashed Xiao Yang's shoulder. The ray of light emitted a wave of light the moment it made contact with his body. That sharp blade light was hindered. Soon after, The light was forcefully parted by a blade as the Bone Emperor blade mercilessly hacked into Xiao Yang's shoulder. Clang! Sparks shot out the moment Xiao Yang was struck, but fresh blood did not flow from him. A couple of broken scale fragments shot out. Those scale fragments came from the Dragon Phoenix ancient armor hidden under his skin that had been summoned by him at this critical moment. Ding! The heavy ruler in Xiao Yang's hands was suddenly swung after the Bone Emperor blade struck him. It ruthlessly smashed into the Bone Emperor blade and sent the blade flying. He turned his head and looked at the faint bloody mark on his shoulder. His expression became slightly gloomy. It was the first time that his defensive formation had been forcefully broken after he had used the six-joint body-flowing ruler. From this, one could tell just how frightening the offensive speed of the first Tianzuan was after both man and blade merged. What a tough body. The first Tianzuan's body once again appeared on the Bone Emperor blade that had been sent flying. He strangely laughed as he looked at Xiao Yang and said, "Your speed is too slow. It is unable to catch up with me after I have merged with the blade." Xiao Yang was without expression. He nodded slowly but did not deny the strength of this first Tianzuan. Just this attack could challenge an advanced 2-star Do Sheng. This point alone allowed the first Tianzuan to be proud. A long breath of air was slowly emitted from within Xiao Yang's mouth. His expression gradually became grave as both of his hands were placed together. After which, they swiftly changed and formed numerous complicated hand seals. Following the change in these hand seals, the spiritual strength on his brow suddenly broke from his body. It transformed into a huge illusionary figure that covered his body. "Since you are fast, I shall be faster than you." Xiao Yang's hand slowly stilled. A cold smile was lifted on his face. Yellow Spring Divine Anger. Xiao Yang's mind moved as the large illusionary figure slowly widened its huge mouth. A terrifying spiritual attack suddenly swept out like a storm. Boom! This terrifying sonic spiritual attack disseminated through the air. The bodies of nearly 70% of the Hall of Souls experts in this area suddenly stiffened at this moment. A bang sounded as their bodies vanished. Both their souls and their physical bodies had been destroyed by this spiritual assault. The powerful spiritual attack was detected by the first Tianzuan. Before he could do anything after just detecting it, that spiritual attack struck his body. The enormous Bone Emperor blade was sent flying at this moment. An elderly figure also flew out of the blade the moment this spiritual attack landed. A mouthful of fresh blood was wildly spat out. The first Tianzuan was sent flying from the Bone Emperor blade by Xiao Yang. Yellow Spring Finger. Xiao Yang suddenly pressed with his finger after watching the first Tianzuan get forcefully thrown out of the Bone Emperor blade. An enormous energy hand then appeared before it ruthlessly pressed onto the body of the first Tianzuan. A frightening strength caused the first Tianzuan's body to explode almost instantly. His arm turned into a bloody fog. Yellow Spring Palm. A roar and a finger turned the situation around, but Xiao Yang did not show any mercy. He once again slammed his palm forward as an enormous energy palm formed. It struck the first Tianzuan SN body. The first Tianzuan's body was like a cannonball as it shot down from the sky and ruthlessly pierced the ground. A frightening wave forcefully rose from the land, forming a pit a couple of thousand of feet deep. In 3 strikes, the Demon Saint Hong Quan's 3 ultimate skills were unleashed by Xiao Yang with extreme familiarity. The Yellow Spring Divine Anger would harm one's soul while the Yellow Spring Finger and the Yellow Spring Palm would destroy one's body. Their combined might could only be described as terrifying. Xiao Yang floated in the sky. He slowly exhaled a breath of air as his eyes looked at the deep pit with some indifference. There was a little aura lingering at that spot. Clearly, the first Tianzuan still had a couple of breaths remaining. Die. Xiao Yang's eyes were cold and indifferent. His finger aimed at the bottom of the deep pit from a great distance. He suddenly clenched his hand as the large hall suddenly emitted an extremely powerful energy ripple. The space in front of Xiao Yang became distorted. A figure slowly appeared. At the same time, an unusually powerful aura also swept over this sealed space. "Xiao Yang, how dare you?" Xiao Yang grinned after hearing the low and deep sound. He looked at the ghost-like figure. It seemed as though he did not feel that it was strange for this human figure to suddenly appear. His voice was calm as he said, "Deputy Chief of the Hall of Souls, are you finally unable to hold back any longer after hiding for such a long time?" The human figure that had appeared in front of Xiao Yang was completely wrapped within a black fog. 2 unusually dark and dense eyes shot out of the fog, causing one's heart to feel a lingering fear. This mysterious person was surprisingly the Deputy Chief of the Hall of Souls, who had intervened when the Sky Mansion Alliance was formed back then. "Xiao Yang, you are forcing my Hall of Souls to hand you the corpse of Xiao Zhan." The black fog slowly rippled as an unusually pale face was revealed. That face did not appear old. Instead, it appeared like a youth, but the tone that this youth used was unusually sinister. This allowed one to understand that this person's age was definitely not what he revealed on the surface. "I have said that if anything happens to my father, I will hand the Chu Shi ancient god jade to the Jiyu clan." Xiao Yang faintly smiled. He did not feel the slightest fear. If one were to reveal even the slightest weakness to these people from the Hall of Souls, these people would grab onto it and one would never be able to recover. Even though he was constantly worried about Xiao Zhan's safety in his mind, he did not reveal such thoughts through his actions. Otherwise, the ones who would end up suffering would be his father and him. There is no need for it. You will perhaps not be given such an opportunity. I will personally bring you back to the Hun clan this time around and allow the both of you to be reunited. A cold and indifferent smile surfaced on the face of the deputy hall chief. Originally, the clan was planning to allow you to live a little longer. However, it seems you do not treasure such an opportunity. Xiao Yang was non-committal. He was too lazy to utter such nonsense to this deputy chief. With a wave of his hand, a hot flame suddenly shot toward the large pit below. He was planning on beating a dog when it was down, so he would finish off the first Tianzuan in this place. The eyes of the deputy chief of the Hall of Souls immediately turned cold after he saw Xiao Yang attack to kill in front of him. He flicked his finger and a black vapor rolled out. The black vapor turned into a black dragon that swallowed the flame. After which, his large hand reached for Xiao Yang. Black fog shot out of his fingers in all directions. These black fogs transformed into 5 large chains that rushed toward Xiao Yang with a crashing sound. Do not think that you can act arrogantly just because you have broken through to the 2nd star of the Dosheng class. You are not even worth mentioning in front of me. A ferocity surfaced on the deputy hall chief's face. His strength was an advanced 3-star Dosheng, and he was only a little weaker compared to the 3 great dragon kings from the 3 dragon islands. This kind of strength could completely destroy Xiao Yang. However, Xiao Yang's expression continued to remain calm as the deputy chief of the Hall of Souls' sharp attack came. Xiao Yang did not intend to deal with this attack. Instead, he grabbed at the large pit below from a great distance. A large fire hand appeared in the sky and reached for the large pit below. You are seeking death. The eyes of the deputy hall chief turned gloomy when he saw Xiao Yang completely ignore him. He gave a dense smile as the black chains encircled Xiao Yang before suddenly tightening. The space around Xiao Yang suddenly fluctuated when the black chains were about to entwine around him. An extremely wild and violent chaotic spatial flow spread. A terrifying tearing force shattered those chains. Who is it? The sudden intervention caused the deputy hall chief to feel startled. His eyes hurriedly swept around as he cried out in a cold voice. You are also not worth mentioning in the eyes of this emperor. A cold voice slowly sounded after the deputy hall chief uttered those words. The deputy hall chief then saw a lovely well-proportioned figure suddenly appear in front of Xiao Yang. He could sense a relatively dense pressure emanating from this figure. Who are you? This is a matter of my Hall of Souls. Outsiders should not intervene lest you get implicated. The deputy hall chief's eyes were grave as he stared at the purple-haired figure and demanded in a deep voice. Is the Hall of Souls very great? Zi Yang curled her lips upon hearing this. She appeared to hold great disdain. During the powerful and prosperous times of the ancient Void Dragon tribe, they were not even afraid of the Hun clan. Even less needed to be said about a subordinate faction of the Hun clan, such as the Hall of Souls. Xiao Yang has said that he will turn this place into a bloodbath today. Zi Yang's pretty eyes swept over this deputy hall chief of the Hall of Souls. She faintly smiled and said, wouldn't it have been fine if you simply continue to hide inside? Why do you need to come out and seek death? How arrogant. I'm afraid that you do not have the ability to kill me. The deputy hall chief's expression was extremely ugly as he cried out in a cold voice. This was the first time in many years that he had heard such an obvious threat and felt looked down upon. Although he could sense that Zi Yang was an expert who had reached the 4th star of the Dosheng class, he might not end up dead if they were to really fight. Xiao Yang glanced at this deputy hall chief before completely ignoring him. He maneuvered his hand, causing the large flame hand to pull the first Tianzuan from the large and deep pit. At this moment, the first Tianzuan's arm had exploded into a bloody fog as fresh blood covered his body. Even his soul had been wounded by the yellow spring divine anger from earlier. His sight had even become a little blurry since his physical body and even his soul had suffered severe damage. Xiao Yang's eyes calmly observed the first Tianzuan, who seemed to be so badly wounded that he was unable to retaliate. His large fire hand pulled the first Tianzuan over, but that dull old face suddenly revealed a renewed ferocity when the first Tianzuan was less than 100 feet from Xiao Yang. His body started to swell. Boom. The swelling body was only midway done when Xiao Yang clenched his fist without expression. The large fire hand mercilessly crushed the first Tianzuan. This frightening force caused the first Tianzuan's physical body to burst apart. A black light suddenly shot away after the first Tianzuan's physical body had exploded. It wildly shot toward the deputy hall chief of the Hall of Souls. Trying to escape. Xiao Yang let out a cold snort after noticing that the soul of the first Tianzuan was planning to flee. When it came to such an expert, it was possible to change to another physical body and be reborn as long as one's soul was not destroyed. At that time, he would become a big threat again. Naturally, it was impossible for Xiao Yang to simply allow such a threat to escape, so he flicked his finger and the large fire hand turned into a fire web that wrapped around the first Tianzuan's soul. How dare you! The expression of the deputy chief of the Hall of Souls sank upon seeing Xiao Yang's attempt to capture the first Tianzuan. He lifted his hand and a black fog erupted from his sleeve in all directions. The black fog blotted out the sun and permeated the air as it swept towards Xiao Yang. You will not be able to attack in front of this emperor. Zi Yang coldly laughed when this deputy hall chief attacked. Her hands formed a seal with lightning-like speed and a dark golden luster erupted from her body. In the blink of an eye, this luster formed a huge golden dragon. The dragon widened its mouth and acted like a large whale that was swallowing water. Within a couple of inhalations, the dragon had devoured the black fog even with the fog's extremely powerful erosion properties. The ancient void dragon tribe. The deputy chief of the Hall of Souls exclaimed after seeing the large golden dragon that Zi Yang had summoned. Come back. Xiao Yang reached out with his hand after Zi Yang blocked the deputy hall chief of the Hall of Souls. The fire web wrapped around the first Tianzuan's soul. The high temperature radiating from the web caused the first Tianzuan to let out a miserable screech. Soon after, the soul flew back and landed in Xiao Yang's hands. Xiao Yang looked at the cluster of black fog in the fire web in his hand. The black fog churned before gathering into the face of first Tianzuan. There was an incomparable viciousness filling that face. Xiao Yang ignored the hatred of the first Tianzuan. He shrank the fire barrier and formed a fire jade bottle. After which, he placed a spiritual seal onto it and tossed it into his storage ring. Since that fellow was the first Tianzuan of the Hall of Souls, he would definitely be aware of many secrets. It might be possible to gain some information about the Hall of Souls' motive for gathering souls from his mouth. It is unexpected that you are even able to request the ancient void dragon tribe to help you. The deputy hall chief of the Hall of Souls involuntarily laughed in extreme anger after watching Xiao Yang seal the soul of the first Tianzuan. A 4-star Do Sheng could be considered a top expert even within the Han clan. He had not expected Xiao Yang to be able to invite such an expert this time around. However, my Hall of Souls is not a place that a young fellow like you can turn into a bloodbath just because you wish to. The deputy hall chief of the Hall of Souls suddenly pulled back. At the same time, a silver jade token appeared in his hand. He shattered the token and an extremely dense spatial fluctuation began to rapidly spread, but he was stunned to find that a spatial tunnel did not appear after the spatial token was broken. The spatial energy fluctuated for a moment before slowly disappearing. I have already used the chaotic spatial flow to surround the space in this area. No spatial ripple can be emitted. Hence, you will not be able to summon any reinforcements even if you use a spatial jade token. Zi Yang spoke with a smile as she mocked the deputy chief of the Hall of Souls, whose expression gradually became ugly. The deputy hall chief's face twitched. His heart finally sank. This time around, Xiao Yang's group had really come prepared. The Hall of Souls has been chasing after both my teacher and me for so many years. It is now time to repay that debt. Relax, I will tear down the heaven, earth, and man halls one at a time. Xiao Yang's eyes were filled with a dense promise as he looked at the deputy chief of the Hall of Souls and spoke. Xiao Yang, the only mistake that my Hall of Souls has made during these years is failing to kill you early on. This has allowed you to gain strength, but you should not be happy. Although my Han clan cannot attack you because of the agreement between the ancient clans, it will not be long before the agreement will not be able to restrain my Han clan. At that time, you will discover that my Han clan far exceeds your imagination. The deputy hall chief of the Hall of Souls inhaled a deep breath of air. He looked at this devastated space. Even half of the large black hall had collapsed. A large number of the experts from the Hall of Souls had been lost during the energy wave that had been emitted from the earlier battle. This time around, the losses of the Man Hall were incomparably miserable. At that time, your Xiao clan and the Sky Manian Alliance will be completely eliminated. The deputy hall chief of the Hall of Souls laughed a dense laugh as his body suddenly exploded. Black fog spread and forcefully tore the chaotic spatial flow apart. His body moved, shot into the tier, and disappeared. This person had abandoned everyone within the Man Hall. The retreat of the deputy hall chief of the Hall of Souls before a fight had clearly exceeded the expectations of Xiao Yang's group. Hence, he was allowed to tear space and flee before anyone could react. This fellow is really quick to run. Xiao Yang stared at the spot where the deputy hall chief had fled and frowned, but that frown quickly relaxed. The deputy hall chief of the Hall of Souls was not an ordinary person. He had the strength of an advanced 3-star Do Sheng. If Zi Yang wasn't accompanying them today, an extremely miserable battle would definitely have broken out. Moreover, even after experiencing such a battle, Xiao Yang was not confident he could truly kill the deputy hall chief like he had killed the first Tianzuan. After all, the strength of the deputy hall chief was far from what the first Tianzuan could compare with. Although it is not difficult to defeat him, I am not able to stop him if he chooses to flee with all his strength. Zi Yang also felt a little helpless. If an advanced 3-star Do Sheng expert insisted on fleeing, She would not be able to stop that expert, and this deputy hall chief of the Hall of Souls was extremely cautious. He had simply fled before even fighting. Therefore, Xi Yang would not be able to retain him. Forget it. It doesn't matter if he escapes. The Hall of Souls will sooner or later guess that we are the ones responsible for this matter. The Alliance and the Hall of Souls are at odds with each other. Some time earlier, the Hall of Souls had launched an attack on the Alliance. Time and time around, we will have returned them the favor. Otherwise, outsiders might think that our alliance can only be suppressed by the Hall of Souls and act cowardly. Xiao Yang nodded. His finger gently rubbed his storage ring as he faintly laughed. Being able to capture the first Tianzuan and obtain the Sea Heart Flame meant that he had gained a lot during this trip. Moreover, they had even destroyed a branch hall of the Hall of Souls. This kind of loss was something that even the Hall of Souls would not be able to easily accept. You should also finish off the remaining people. Do not allow any of them to escape. Xiao Yang glanced at the experts from the Hall of Souls who were fleeing in all directions as both the little fairy doctor and Qing Lin gave chase. After which, he turned to the battleground between Yarrow Larrow and Saint Gu. The Saint Gu had already fallen into a disadvantage at this moment. Even his aura had become a little weary. Although he tried to act tough with his words, he was only a high-level Bansheng. It was impossible for him to fight with Yarrow Larrow, who was an elite Do Sheng. It was only a matter of time before he was finished off. Pay attention to Gu. Do not allow this old ghost to flee. Xi Yang nodded. Her delicate figure moved and rushed forward. She became a huge dragon that charged over to a herd of goat. Wind swept all around. Within a short minute, those experts from the Hall of Souls were completely killed by her. Xiao Yang was too lazy to split his attention to handle this one-sided slaughter. He lowered his head to look at the large hall below. After which, he clenched his hand and the heavy Shen ruler appeared in a flash. He ruthlessly slashed at the large hall. 1,000-foot large flame pillar erupted and split the large hall apart, revealing countless black chains inside. A couple of spiritual light clusters hung on the ends of those chains. The corner of Xiao Yang's eyes involuntarily twitched upon seeing the tens of thousands of spiritual bodies. These bastards from the Hall of Souls were using these souls as nourishment. Xiao Yang gently waved his hand. A frightening wind blew like a wild storm. Those chains were shattered apart and the souls within those light clusters opened their eyes at this moment. They looked around them in a frail and lost manner. After which, wildly joyous spiritual fluctuations were emitted. Although they were unaware of what exactly had happened, they could taste freedom. They had been locked in this place for an unknown number of years as prisoners. At times, even death itself had become their only hope. All of you should leave. Do not allow the Hall of Souls to capture you again. Xiao Yang softly sighed. He then spoke as he watched those souls. Some of them seemed to be so happy and excited that they were tearing up. Numerous souls lingered in the sky. Some knelt to Xiao Yang while others deeply bowed to him. Finally, they charged out of the barrier with a whistle and crazily headed to the outside world. Xiao Yang involuntarily shook his head as he watched those souls flee. He was just about to turn around when a thought suddenly passed through his heart. His eyes looked at the hall that had turned into ruins as he vaguely sensed a strange fluctuation from deep within it. He hesitated for a moment before he slowly landed. He gently waved his hand as a frightening wind sent a 1,000-foot large rock pillar flying. Xiao Yang swiftly dug deeper. The ruins parted to reveal a large pit in the blink of an eye. There was a 5-foot large light cluster suspended in the pit. The light cluster was transparent. Its exterior was attached to tons of black chains. The other end of these chains had been connected to those souls that had fled earlier. This light cluster was the thing that had formed from those spiritual bodies earlier. This is. Xiao Yang frowned as he looked at this light cluster. He could sense an extremely terrifying spiritual fluctuation within the light cluster. Moreover, this spiritual fluctuation was extremely pure. There was not one impurity mixed within it. This is the essence of a soul. Yarrow Larrow's voice was transmitted from behind Xiao Yang. Xiao Yang turned his head and saw Yarrow Larrow descend from the sky. That old ghost Gu had quickly been finished off after Xi Yang intervened. Hence, Yarrow Larrow was free to look around. Soul essence, Xiao Yang slowly muttered. At this moment, he naturally understood something. The soul was the basis of life. All living creatures possess a soul and deep within the soul was a hint of soul essence. This was the foundation for the formation of a soul. It could be described as the most mysterious but purest energy in the world. Such a large amount of soul essence requires at least 1 million souls. Yarrow Larrow's expression was a little complicated as he said, this soul light cluster should be the collection of the man hall over the years. The deputy hall chief was in such a hurry to escape that he failed to even bring such an important thing with him. 1 million souls. Xiao Yang softly exhaled. The methods of this Hall of Souls were indeed vicious. In order to obtain this soul essence, they had to consume 1 million souls. Moreover, This was only the Man Hall. There were still quite a number of branch halls across the Central Plains. Those places would likely also possess such a mysterious thing. This Hall of Souls is really the scourge of the entire continent. They are indeed a scourge. Yarrow Larrow was unable to hide the hatred on his face. This Hall of Souls used all sorts of methods to attain its despicable goals. Such a mysterious and cruel method was little different than obtaining the blood or flesh of a living person. Moreover, this method was perhaps even more vicious. I wonder just what the Hall of Souls is planning to do by gathering so much soul essence. Xiao Yang knit his brows. He felt that this soul essence definitely involved a grand scheme. Absorbing the soul essence will strengthen one's spiritual strength. If one possesses an extremely vast amount of soul essence, one might be able to step into the legendary DI state if one is lucky, Yarrow Larrow slowly explained. Does teacher mean that someone from the Hall of Souls? No, the Hun clan is planning to raise his spiritual strength to the D state. Is this the reason why they have been capturing souls? To remove the soul essence from them? Xiao Yang asked with a startled voice. This is likely the case, but I cannot be certain. They planned to get me to submit to them when I was captured by the Hall of Souls back then. It seems that they require my alchemist skills to help them do something, but I did not agree to help them. Hence, I do not know just what they needed me to do. Based on my guess, it should be related to this soul essence. Yarrow Larrow fondled his chin and spoke with a frown. Xiao Yang knit his brow upon hearing this guess. These various signs indicated that the Hall of Souls seemed to be preparing something. The collection of souls to refine soul essence seemed to be one step of many. These people, just what are they planning to do? Xiao Yang had once met the demon Saint Huang Quan. This peak expert had trained until his soul had reached the D state, but based on what his lingering soul fragment had said, even if one's soul reached the D state, one would not be able to reach the Do D class. Perhaps, the thing that he mentioned to be missing in this world was the key to resolve this mystery. Could it be that the thing that demon Saint Huang Quan claimed to be missing was soul essence? Xiao Yang shook his head while feeling at a loss. He sighed. He did not have a clue even after thinking about what he meant. All he could say was, what should we do with this thing? Xiao Yang was naturally talking about the soul essence in front of him. This thing was something that the Man Hall had formed after much difficulty. Its value was extremely great and unmeasurable. There was no telling just how many alchemists would go crazy if this thing were to brought to the outside world. This was created from slaughtering an unimaginable number of people. It should not exist in this world. Since it has already been formed, there is naturally no reason to abandon it. You should take it. Your spiritual level is currently at the advanced heavenly state. There is still a ways to go to the perfect heavenly state. This will definitely help you to snatch the purifying demonic lotus flame. Yarrow Larrow hesitated for a moment before replying. Xiao Yang was startled upon hearing this suggestion, but he did not put up an act. He turned his head and looked at the spiritual light cluster. With a wave of his hand, he shattered those chains. After which, his hand slowly touched the surface of the light cluster and softly said, I will help take revenge for all of you. The soft sentence suddenly caused the faint luster to send a signal. There seemed to be many different messages being emitted from the soul light cluster. Xiao Yang quietly accepted these messages. Far too much soul essence had been gathered within this light cluster, so there was no form of intelligence within it. Only some hatred, unwillingness, and other emotions that existed before the complete death of a soul remained. It was extremely difficult to completely refine these emotions. If one were to randomly absorb them, they would end up warping one's mind. However, that single sentence from Xiao Yang seemed to have quietly resolved these hidden negative emotions. This could be considered another form of intelligence that had formed by this soul essence. Even when they died, they would use their final strength to make things difficult for those who killed them. Although it appeared easy to resolve these emoti, those from the Hall of Souls would never utter such words. Those with affinity have the right to obtain any spiritual object in this world. It seems that both you and this soul essence fit each other. Yarrow Larrow involuntarily smiled and remarked after watching Xiao Yang use one sentence to resolve the hidden negative emotions within the soul light cluster. These people from the Hall of Souls have committed all sorts of evil deeds. Xiao Yang softly sighed. He waved his sleeve as he put this soul light cluster within his storage ring. After which, he looked around him. At this moment, the remaining people within the Man Hall, with the exception of the deputy hall chief, who had escaped, had all been killed. Although many of the experts from the Hall of Souls were spiritual bodies that would vanish from the world upon death, there were still many of them who possessed a physical body. Hence, this area was covered with corpses. A rich bloody scent rose to the sky. A slight ripple appeared in Xiao Yang's eyes when he observed this scene. He quickly became indifferent. He had seldom engaged in such a massacre, but he would not feel the slightest mercy for these people who aided others in committing atrocities. All of these people had hands that were stained with lives. Even the Xiao clan had nearly been eliminated by these people from the Hall of Souls. Let's leave. Xiao Yang did not wish to stay in this corpse-covered territory for long. After grabbing the soul light cluster, he turned around and rushed out of the mountain range. Yarrow Laro and the rest behind carefully searched the area once more before they swiftly followed him. Around 10 minutes after Xiao Yang's group left, the space on a mountain a short distance away began to fluctuate. A black figure appeared from it and finally entered the ruins of the hall. His expression quickly became gloomy after seeing the dug-up ruins. Fury and regret filled his eyes. The souls that my man Hall has collected with much difficulty for 100 years were taken away by that brat. If word of this reaches the clan, even I will be severely punished. That black figure was naturally the deputy hall chief of the Hall of Souls, who had fled earlier. At this moment, he was looking at the empty depths of the hall. His expression had turned a little pale. The man hall was considered an important branch hall within the Hall of Souls. The souls that it imprisoned were also relatively strong. Thus, the soul essence it had collected was extremely powerful. Now, that soul essence had been taken by Xiao Yang and those imprisoned souls had also been released by him. This loss was something that even the Hall of Souls could not endure. That brat has an expert from the ancient Void Dragon tribe guarding him. With my strength alone, I am no match for her. Other than the Hall Chief, no one within the Hall of Souls can kill that brat. This is the danger that comes from allowing a tiger to grow. The Deputy Hall Chief of the Hall of Souls shook his head in frustration. Back then, Xiao Yang had been an extremely tiny ant in the eyes of the Hall of Souls, yet after a decade, the ant from back then had slowly grown to a point where the entire Hall of Souls could not deal with him. The speed at which he had grown really caused one to feel an endless regret from just thinking about it. If they had paid a little more attention back then, they would have been able to get rid of a great enemy early on. The purifying demonic lotus flame will descend on this world in 2 months. The Hall Chief will definitely get involved then. If the clan is able to obtain the purifying demonic lotus flame, we will be able to jump our plans forward. This can help make up for the losses of the destruction of the man hall. The eyes of the Deputy Hall Chief rapidly flashed. A moment later, he finally clenched his teeth. The space around him fluctuated as his body slowly disappeared. We failed snatch the purifying lotus demon flame the last time around, delaying the Hun clan's plans. This time around, our Hun clan will definitely obtain it. Once we obtain that demon flame, the clan will no longer need to follow the so-called clan agreement. At that time, the clan's experts will intervene and Xiao Yang will only end up dying. HMPH, Xiao Yang. Just you wait, my Hun clan will definitely have our revenge. You have destroyed our man hall, but the next time around, we will destroy your Sky Mansion alliance. The deputy chief of the Hall of Souls disappeared from the world, but his wicked, vicious voice slowly lingered and did not disappear for a long time. The news that a Hall of Souls hall had been destroyed might not have been announced, but it was obvious that one could not hide such shocking information. Hence, within a short 1 week after the incident, this matter seemed to have grown wings and rocketed around the Central Plains, stirring a ton of shock. The factions in the Central Plains were all clearly aware of the strength of the Hall of Souls. This overbearing existence had been standing at the top of the Central Plains. Even the Pill Tower had ended up at a disadvantage during many battles with them. Hence, many people did not dare to take revenge despite having suffered to the Hall of Souls. All they could do was suppress the hatred in their hearts. After hearing such news, it was natural that some people would feel a great joy. The new super faction known as the Sky Mansion Alliance also began to be regarded seriously. Back then, no one had thought much about this alliance. After all, the Hall of Souls was too strong, and the alliance had been attacked some time earlier. This had caused many to think that the alliance was beginning to sway in the face of a storm. However, the alliance had taken this action to inform everyone that the Sky Mansion was unafraid of the Hall of Souls. Something like destroying the Man Hall of the 3 Qiangang Halls was something that the Pill Tower had never accomplished even during their war with the Hall of Souls. This time around, the alliance had succeeded in doing what they couldn't. The Sky Mansion Alliance had undoubtedly shown everyone that they possessed the strength to fight with the Hall of Souls. Due to the destruction of the Man Hall, the entire Central Plains and the alliance ended gaining an extremely excited atmosphere. While this occurred, Xiao Yang spent a couple of days resting, so he could refine and absorb the soul essence soon. His spiritual state was at the advanced heavenly state. He was a little stronger than even Yarrow Lao, but there was still one state after this advanced state. It was the perfect heavenly state. Only after reaching the perfect heavenly state would it be possible to progress to the legendary DI state. A DI state soul was seldom formed even during the ancient times. Those who could reach this level were mostly peak existences during that era. An example was someone like Demon Saint Huang Quan. Although stepping into the DI state did not mean that one would be able to become a genuine Do DI, there was one point that need not be doubted. After reaching the peak of the 9th star of the Do Sheng class, one's spiritual strength would allow one's strength to soar beyond the limit and progress again. One might even be able to become the so-called half-DI existence like Demon Saint Huang Quan. Of course, The advancement of one's spiritual state was extremely difficult. Hardly anyone had reached the perfect heavenly state even across the entire continent. That mysterious ancestor of the small pill tower, who liked to have fun roaming the world, might be one person. The Jiu clans and the Hun clan's heads might also have reached that state, but regardless of how one counted, the numbers would be miserably small. Xiao Yang sat on a large rock on a mountain in the star realm as a layer of clouds floated around it. There was a 5-foot large light cluster floating in front of him. A gentle and pure luster continued to be emitted from it. Light landed on the surrounding grass and leaves, causing them to become a richer green. Xiao Yang's eyes studied this soul light cluster as he gently exhaled. He extended his hand and touched the light cluster. Following this contact, Xiao Yang was able to sense the vast and mighty strength that this soul essence cluster contained. That feeling caused the soul on his brow to feel extremely warm. Xiao Yang widened his mouth. A cluster of grayish-brown flames with a faint blue was spat out. The heavenly flame within his body had already refined the sea heart flame. Of course, the growth after refining this heavenly flame was insignificant, something that Xiao Yang had expected. His strength had merely advanced a little, but not enough to reach the intermediate second star of the Doshan class. The flame mantra had also improved a little, but it had merely advanced from a quasi-Tian class Qi method to a Tian class low-level Qi method. The increase was not obvious. Xiao Yang did not feel depressed because of this situation since his heart had been prepared for this. He was already an elite Dosheng, which was different from his strength back then. An ordinary heavenly flame would no longer be able to catch his eye. The flame appeared and floated below the soul light cluster before it turned into a raging flame that wrapped around the light cluster. Although the soul essence was relatively pure, this was something that had been obtained from the Hall of Souls. It was always good to be extra careful. The high temperature gradually seeped into the soul light cluster before it began to boil. There was whips of extremely faint black vapor that were emitted from it. This black vapor quickly vanished. Xiao Yang lifted his brow upon seeing these black vapors. He could sense extremely weak thoughts within them. These had been inserted by the experts from the Hall of Souls. If one absorbed these black tendrils into one's soul, they would end up resulting in a severe sequela. These people from the Hall of Souls are indeed extremely vicious. Xiao Yang waved his sleeve. The flame soared as it completely refined all of the black vapors hidden deep within the light cluster. After removing these black vapors, the soul light cluster became more crystal clear. At a glance, it looked as though it was an illusion. This refinement continued for half an hour before Xiao Yang slowly scattered the flame. He looked at the crystal-like soul cluster in front of him and finally sighed. His hands moved to form a seal as his spiritual strength surged out of his brow. It turned into a human figure that looked like Xiao Yang. This figure sat in front of the soul light cluster before widening his mouth. A suction force surged from it. The soul light cluster trembled after this suction force appeared. An unusually pure soul essence drifted from the soul cluster. It lingered around Xiao Yang's body before flowing into his mouth, nostrils, and pores as it continuously surged into him. The surface of Xiao Yang's soul began to form a mysterious crystal-like layer as he began to absorb more and more of the soul essence. This video will end here.